Yo, man, I'm gonna go over here, man, to get his brother a little rap, man, see what his head is all about. You know what I'm saying? I'll be right back. Don't forget.
Yes, I think I'm going out of my head. Yes, I think I'm going out of my head. Yes, I think I'm going out of my head. Yes, I think I'm going out of my. Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Chu, the Center for Asian American Media's Membership and Donor Relations Manager. On behalf of CAAM's team, thank you for joining us at Storytellers Session, Ursula Liang. We are honored to present this conversation between filmmaker Ursula Liang and CAAM's Talent Development and Special Projects Manager, Sapana Sakya. Following their conversation, you'll have the chance to ask Ursula your questions during the Q&A. Share your questions for Ursula using the chat box. If you need any technical support, please send an email to events@cammedia.org. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that we at CAAM are deeply troubled by the recent increase in attacks and violence against Asians and Asian Americans. We know our communities are hurting, and we are here for you. CAAM was founded to support and amplify authentic stories about Asians and Asian Americans, and we believe that stories can facilitate greater understanding, empathy, and a space for conversation. If you aren't familiar with CAAM's work, I encourage you to check out our website, cammedia.org, and our social media for more information on our programs, events, and initiatives. CAAM's work and our support of storytellers like Ursula is possible thanks to people like you and our wonderful community of members and supporters. If you aren't yet a CAAM member, I hope you'll consider joining. For a limited time, new members can save 15% on our friend and supporter memberships. Simply use the promo code 2021 Storytellers at our membership page to join today and save. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. So members receive admission to programs like this, along with special access to our upcoming festival, Campfest 2021. Campfest is the nation's largest celebration of the best in Asian to Asian American film, music, and food. It will be presented May 13th to the 23rd and will feature a variety of virtual programs and a few special drive-in screenings. Stay tuned to our website for more information. And with that, please welcome CAAM's Talent Development and Special Projects Manager, Sapana Sakya.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that, Jen, and welcome to our first Storytellers Session. I'm so honored to have this opportunity to talk to storyteller Ursula Liang. Ursula has worked as a journalist at establishments like the New York Times, ESPN, Hyphen Magazine, among other outlets. But CAAM audiences might recognize her as the director of the film Nine Man, which screened at Campfest in 2015. Ursula is now promoting her new film about to be premiering on PBS in April, Down a Dark Stairwell. Please join me in welcoming Ursula to the stage. Hi, Ursula. Thank you
Hi,
so much for
Sapana.
joining us. Great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. You know, I've known you for many years, and as a filmmaker in the community, and recently as a very active member of some networks that we're both a part of, like ADOC and Brown Girls Doc Mafia, for example. And I've also been a great admirer of your style, by the way, along with a lot of other fans I know that you have out there. But then I realized I really don't know much else about you. So I wanted to start this conversation at the very beginning, I guess. And if you don't mind, I'd love to ask you just about, you know, where you grew up, about your childhood. I know you grew up in Newton, which is not far from Boston in Massachusetts. So if you could tell us a little bit about that, like what you were like as a kid, and we'll start from there. And I also know that we have some pictures from your childhood that we'd love to put up there while you're talking.
Yeah, I was actually born in Alexandria, Virginia, and I think we moved to the Boston area when I was very small. I can't remember what age, but most of my upbringing was in Newton, Massachusetts, which is a suburb of Boston, which is that is us with the fall leaves. We really liked. My parents were really smart. They bought us toys like rakes that we could play with, and they would have us like play and like rake all the leaves into a pile. And I have fond memories of jumping into piles of leaves and messing them up afterwards. But my dad was a professional, like any good Chinese young man was. But he also had like a real passion for arts, and the way I jumped into the pile of leaves was off of like a stump in our backyard. He had this idea. We had a tree that died in our yard, and he had this idea that we wouldn't just get rid of the tree, but it would be cut down, and he would carve it into a hand sculpture. So that was his like life plan, was to carve the stump into a hand sculpture. But of course, the stump just stayed like a stump for my entire life, that house, and we used it to jump off of and jump into things like leaves. So yeah, I grew up in a really loving family in the suburbs of Massachusetts, which were at that time very white, culturally dominated, I would say, by like Irish, Italian, and Jewish communities. So it was a very specific experience at that time, growing up as a person of mixed race descent, especially at a time where there were really no images of us on screen or in any kind of media. I mean, all I knew was my dad. There was only one Chinese girl in my elementary school. No, there were three Chinese people, and then one of them left. So 2 boys and 1 girl. And my experience as an Asian American person really has been evolving over time. And I think a lot of my cultural knowledge has come through like teaching myself and by making my films. So
yeah, there's a great picture I wanted to put up of you on a soccer team.
Oh, yeah.
There you are.
I'm the brown person in this picture.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's a great illustration of what you were talking about, and you know how you grew up.
Yeah,
I'd love to hear.
I had braids then, and everybody, I got cast in the school plays as Tiger Lily. Like either the non-human or the non-white lead in all the school plays. But yeah, I had like a moment recently watching a film called Warrior Women, which is about some activists in the Native community. And there's this really great archival footage in that. And I was watching a rough cut of it. It was at a lab, and the directors are Native. And I just burst into tears watching the rough cut, because there were so many images of these like, young girls with braids like I had growing up, but I never ever saw somebody that looked like that. I mean, even just to be like somewhat darker than white and having like long straight braids was a novelty to me as a person of my current age. So I was very much hurting for images of myself growing up.
Yeah, I love the stories you just told. And so, I mean, when you were a kid growing up, and obviously in a predominantly white community, Did you think about those things, that you were slightly different? How did you identify? I mean, how did you sort of...
I mean, race wasn't really part of the conversation back then. I mean, or at least maybe it was, but it wasn't in that kind of community. I think something I've learned over the years of like racial exploration is that white people have the choice to choose when to think about race and racial issues. People of color typically don't, and that's part of their everyday existence, grappling with that stuff. So I don't think it was discussed. I think I was, I just felt like I didn't look as pretty as the other girls. My nose was really wide, and things that other people of color would be like aghast to hear me say about myself, because relative to other people of color, I'm pretty white looking. But I just had felt like a sense of being a different person, and that translated into me wanting to be different, wanting to like reclaim being different, and like I literally wore my t-shirts like inside out in high school to somehow be different. I don't know why wearing a t-shirt inside out was a big thing, but like all the seams would always be showing. So, and I would like wrap something around my arm. So it was sort of like a way to reclaim what at some point felt, like a pain point for me.
Mm-hmm. And you said that your father was very artistic and had this dream of, carving the stump of wood into a hand in your yard. Can you talk a little bit more about that? I also see that you're in the soccer team. So there was some artistic influences in there. But he was a doctor. Is that right? Did you grow up, with this, like, I guess, very stereotypical notion of a lot of Asian American families, wanting their kids to go into professions like becoming a doctor or a lawyer, or what was that like?
I think that my dad felt like he was pinned in that position. So his family was the family that immigrated over. And so I think, I'm not sure if it was explicitly said to him. I never had those conversations with my grandparents, but I think he felt obligated to do the right thing and become a doctor, and therefore wasn't able to express himself in the artistic ways that he wanted. So I think he was very committed, and my mom was too, in letting us be expressive and not have to have any kind of line to follow. So no, I always felt like I could do whatever I wanted. We were really lucky to have that kind of freedom. So I did not have, unfortunately, the typical Asian upbringing that everybody else can relate to, where I was forced to do this, that, or that other. But I did have a bowl cut, so I could relate to that.
I had a bowl cut. Oh my God. I totally relate. And I think my father cut my hair. Like, he cut these bangs and they were always slightly crooked.
Did he use a bowl or no?
I don't know what he'd use. I don't remember, but I remember running away from him every time he was about to cut my hair. It was, not a pleasant memory. And I haven't had bangs ever since. Like, no bangs. So, does that mean then that you've always wanted to pursue the arts, or since your family was fairly, and it seems like, was that something that was clear to you, I guess,
Maybe
growing
not.
up?
I mean, I think I wanted to be, I remember a kindergarten job fair that we had to participate in, and I wanted to be either a florist or a veterinarian, because florist is the art side. And then I remember when I was in college, I actually wanted to be a teacher. So my plan was always to be a teacher, but I felt like that that was the type of career that you do burn out in at some point, and that that you can't necessarily do for life. So I felt like I would do a few other things and then go into teaching, and maybe that's what I'm trying to do with film. Maybe I am trying to teach. I'm not. I am interested in films that help people think and learn, and explore things. But there was a part of me actually when I started out as a journalist that really was thinking about the artistic side of things. I wasn't interested in becoming a newspaper person. I was interested in becoming a magazine journalist because, I liked the combination of images and story. I think there was a point in time when I dreamed of becoming a National Geographic photographer, because my dad was one of those people that had, we had like the encyclopedias of National Geographics. But yeah, no, I don't think I really thought so specifically about art, but I always liked doing it.
Yeah. I was just curious. I know that So, when you started to make Nine Man, first of all, I wanted to hear the backstory, like how you landed on the idea for making that film. If you could talk a little bit about that, and if you had the idea to begin with when you started making the film, or how you came to that, because and whether there was a connection between the film and the fact that your father is Chinese American, and sort of you trying to explore your roots, being so disconnected, growing up in Newton, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was sort of invited into the community after I graduated college. And I had never really been part of like a Chinatown community. There were people in my high school that were part of this Nine-Man community that I didn't even know were part of it until I became part of it. And I was like, oh, I recognize you from high school. I had been an athlete in high school. And when I graduated college, I came back home and started playing recreationally. And I was on a volleyball team where there were two Chinese American women, and they were like, oh yeah, you are Chinese. I think, people don't always read me that way because of the way I look, or, my lack of current bowl cut. I don't know. So I joined, they invited me to join their sort of Chinese centric Chinatown team. And as I became part of that women's league that's sort of adjacent to the Nine-Man league, I started seeing sort of some really interesting stories within the men's game, which has a lot deeper history, a lot longer history, and a lot of interesting like cultural complications. And then my brother moved back home, and I sort of reminded people that I had seen in the league that I knew from high school, oh, Peter's also coming home, and maybe he'd like to play. And so he ended up getting on a Nine-Man team, and it ended up becoming a very significant part of his life. So I think I was able to sort of see through his emotion for his team, that this was a little bit more than just an athletic experience for him, that it had this entirely different cultural component that both he and I were experiencing, but he was experienced in very specific ways as like a Chinese American man. So anyway, the sport, for those of you who don't know, is sort of like, I would say it's a cousin of volleyball, even though I think its roots predate the actual foundation of like volleyball's rules. So I try not to call them the same thing. But it's a sort of like a rough and tumble street ball version. And it travels, there's a tournament that travels between all the Chinatowns in North America every year. And so these teams like sort of compete all summer long to be playing and win the championship at the end of the summer. And so there is sort of like this built-in circuit where it goes to a new Chinatown every like 7 or 8 years. And over time, I started playing one year, and then I moved, and then I realized that the circuit had sort of like gone full circle another time, and that it was coming again to New York City, where I was living at the time. And that if I didn't pick up the story, that some of the original pioneers of the games, the voices would be lost. So I felt sort of compelled by the time it sort of made the second circuit around back to me to pick it up, because it was right in my backyard and had sort of no excuse, and there was nobody else doing it. So I felt a little bit like accidentally like pushed into it, but.
Yeah, because you had the interest in the sport and your family connections already. The film is incredible. I mean, it's such a great sports film, and I'm a big fan of sports films. But, watching the film, I don't know if this was conscious, but you definitely focused a lot on the Freemasons. Is it because they're the hometown team from Boston?
I actually don't think that they're, I think that might be your focus. You might have enjoyed it so much, you thought they were in there more than other teams. They're actually not, I think they don't dominate the
primary
time. Yeah. But actually, I was trying to avoid the Boston teams in the beginning because my brother had a specific connection. I had a specific connection.
Oh, I see.
But I did do I did a lot of research. Like I actually made surveys in both Chinese and English and like handed them out at practices and asked people in the community like who they thought was important and who they thought, both player wise and team wise, like represented the community. And that was a team. The Boston Freemasons was a team that kept bubbling up because they had a very specific kind of personality in the tournament that people really enjoyed encountering every year. So they were sort of made as a character, but they were never expected to go very far in the tournament the year that we followed. And so we ended up, the Boston Knights was another team from Boston, and we didn't really intend to have more than one team per city, but they happened to have had a very dramatic win the year that we were watching. And so there was a little bit of a combination of sports scouting that had to happen, as well as story scouting. And you have to, when you're making a sports film, you have to sort of accommodate the winners and the losers in a different way, because if you want the narrative to carry through, a season arc, you actually have to have somebody who makes it to the finals. So
yeah,
I used a little bit. I looked at a film called Spellbound a little bit as a model. There are a lot of great competition films out there, but I know that Spellbound was, a lot of these competition films, they start with the competition and then they work backwards to find their stories. But I had to do a little combination of both, which was following people throughout the season as they're preparing, and then go back and get some of the stories after we figured out who won.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's such an incredible film. And I wondered, I mean, you have so much footage from all of these different teams, from all of the different Chinatowns around the country, mostly the East Coast. I was waiting to see when the San Francisco team was going to come in. It kind of comes in towards the end. But
that was budgetary. That was budgetary. I didn't have any money. CAAM was literally the only grant that I got, and I was living in New York. So I literally took the Chinatown bus back and forth from New York to Boston and DC. And sometimes I was on the computer trying to get that first $1 fare, that $5 fare. And when I went to Toronto, I took the overnight bus to Toronto. And Toronto's public transit system is the worst, because you have to go in order to get to the suburbs where some of those guys lived, you'd have to be on the bus, the subway, and another in between kind of public transportation system. And then the other reality was, at the time, San Francisco, which was an important part of the circuit, and those teams are really good, they were in a bit of a lull, and they weren't practicing. So some of the East Coast teams that are sort of I use this word a little bit cautiously, but the more insecure Chinatowns, where there's not as much, I don't mean that in a personality way, but in a way where there are fewer Asian Americans. And so these communities are much tighter and have more necessary social interaction. The folks in California, the numbers of Asians are so large. Those guys weren't practicing throughout the season. So I couldn't actually film them throughout the season. They were more ringer teams where they would come in at the end. So I know, and also I couldn't fly out there all the time. So there's some practical and
that's a great caveat.
But sorry, guys. Sorry, SF.
No, it was cool. I loved how you presented the SF team as this superstar, with this one superstar athlete who was in the Olympics, and we were waiting for him to enter and win everything. Sorry, I shouldn't reveal everything.
Well, you didn't won, but he did enter.
He did enter, yes. No, I wanted to see if we could put those pictures up from Campfest. I know you had a great screening. It was a packed house at the San Francisco Chinatown.
If I can
Maybe you could talk a little.
Yeah, if I can narrate this is at Great Star. We had an awesome screening there, and I was told later that there were people that went into the balcony. Is there a balcony there? Or somewhere in the back that were drinking beers, which felt very much within the 9-man spirit. So I got a kick out of hearing that. I don't know if they were smoking too. They probably weren't smoking, but it felt having a premiere in that sort of slightly broken down, slightly amazing and epic Chinatown space was really, really fun.
Yeah, it's a packed house too. It's a pretty large space. Tell me who these folks are on the stage.
Well, the first from left to right is Sang Chen. He's a DP/filmmaker in Bay Area. These are all folks that worked on the film. Mike Chung, my lawyer / a production coordinator / brother-in-law. My brother Peter, who did a bunch of translation and stuff. My mom, who drove the car when I was chasing somebody on a motorcycle. Grace, my sister-in-law, who did a bunch of translation and has definitely helped me with a lot of the marketing on the film. Lanley Cito, who was another one of our production coordinators on set and also works for CAAM. Does she work for CAAM for now? I don't know.
She worked for CAAM for a while.
My dad, who made sandwiches while we were sort of and housed people on his floor during the filming of the national tournament. And there's my sister Stephanie, who did a lot of different things, but in addition to like being on set as like a production coordinator, she also like does graphic design, did some of the graphics for the film, and also gives me opinions on all things, including probably what I was wearing that day.
As sisters do, yes.
Yeah, and these are all folks that are in, well, the exception of my dad, these are all folks that live in the Bay Area right now. We've got a lot of folks in the Bay.
So, I mean, it sounds like the filming and the process of making Nine Man was very much, like you said, it was, you know, not well funded initially and all that. What do you think, what was it like for you to transition now to your second film? What are the things that you learned, or, you know, the process that you've kept with you? And what are the things that you said, I'm never doing that again?
I think with both films, I said I'm never making a film again because it's so hard and so much work. And the end of it is always very much a lot of torture. This one we definitely had a bigger budget for, but the budget did come after like the urgent story points. So I started filming this new story, Down a Dark Stairwell, in 2016. And I don't remember when we actually got our funding, but I still had to do a lot of the initial filming when stuff was happening on my own with friends who were willing to volunteer and like just put in work. So the production value of some of that stuff early on is different than the stuff that we filled in with after we got our funding. I don't know. I mean, I learned, I had really good collaborators by the time I started making my second film. So when you have people that you trust, things are a lot easier. That takes a huge burden off of you. I definitely, you know, I don't know if I really, you know, I've learned, number one, that it's like, I knew that it was going to be hard, and I knew the edit was going to be really hard. I think there's a lot of emotional stress for a director during the edit, as a story is like supposedly be taking shape, but it actually isn't come together for many, many, many months. And you just worry that that you've spent all this time and money and resources and people's energy on something that's not going to be good. So I think at least I knew that there was a light at the end of the tunnel this time. So that was a bit of a relief. But I probably made a lot of the same mistakes, other than this time I didn't have to take the Chinatown bus because I was in New York the whole time. But, you know, I did probably do way too much production by traveling with gear on my back on the subway, just trying to be cheap and thrifty.
Yeah. You know, a lot of independent filmmakers like yourself in documentary often do both producing and directing. Was that the case for you, or did you have a partner who?
No, this time I had, actually my producing partner is Rajal Petroda, who I don't know if she's out there now, but she lives in San Francisco. So I was doing the local, like field, production producing, and she was my rock out there in San Francisco. So, the fact that we actually had a budget meant that there was some money to actually tabulate on, spreadsheets and in QuickBooks. And thank God I did not have to do that because, while I claim some Asianness, I don't claim an interest in math or anything like that. So yeah, no, I was lucky to have support in that way.
That's great. So we're going to move into talking a little bit about your current film that's going to premiere next month on PBS, Down a Dark Stairwell. And I know that we have a clip here that we wanted to show from the film. So Down a Dark Stairwell is a film about the 2017 shooting of Akai Gurley by Officer Peter Liang.
2014.
I'm sorry, it's 2016.
It happened in 2014, the shooting.
2014. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the film itself and, your approach to the film, as well as the conversations surrounding the film since the festival run. But the clip you're about to see is focused on some of the Asian American activists who came out in support of Officer Liang, but also other Asian American activists who were out there in solidarity with the Gurley family. So also I needed to thank ITVS for this clip and for their support of the film as well. So we're going to see the film, or see the clip quickly, and then we'll come back. Yeah, that's such an intense clip. I was wondering if you could contextualize this a little bit for us, Ursula, because we're not seeing the full film. But, you know, a couple of reasons why we picked this one, I think, is because I really admire the way you've tried to portray the diversity, I think, within the Asian American community. I think often when we see these conflicts between the Asian community and the BIPOC communities, oftentimes Black communities, it's always against one another. But, you know, the fact is that the Asian community is pretty diverse. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to that? It's such a sensitive topic, and people are really, you know, letting you in to their many private conversations. You know, in the other parts of the film, I see you sitting with different community leaders on both sides. Talk a little bit about that approach and what that was like, and what you wanted the conversation to be about once the film was launched.
Sure. I do want to acknowledge that some of that footage comes from other filmmakers who had developed relationships of their own and access points before we got to the story. So I just want to shout out to folks who are doing the work in lots of different ways and who ended up letting us use some of their footage. You know, this is a little bit of an anomaly in the film. This is sort of, there were, you know, the story is about a police officer an Asian American police officer who kills a innocent Black man. And a lot of the news media really showed these communities pitted against each other. And I think there was some reality to that, where the Asian American community ended up speaking up very strongly in support of the police officer because they felt like he was getting treated unfairly by the system. This was a couple months after the Eric Garner case, where nobody was even indicted for you know, killing Eric Garner on a street with a video showing it. And soon after, you know, 4 months after, the Asian American police officer with no video and supposedly an accident gets not only indicted, but convicted. So, I mean, it was important, you know, the movement was very large, and it was important for me that people understood the scale of the response of our community in addition to other communities, but also the diversity of the response and sort of like where that was coming from. You know, for sure, there are Asian Americans who've been standing in solidarity with the Black community for a very long time. And a lot of those folks really didn't want this story to be told. It was very important that part of the story was included in this, although I would say the large majority of people involved in this case were Asian American, were supporting the police officer. It was a little bit difficult in the edit to figure out how to do this delicately because, you know, even in testing out our footage, we had, if we showed too much of people with Asian faces, no matter what they were saying, people would say that the film was heavily weighted in the opinion, you know, in opinion towards the Asian community, even if all the Asian people were saying, you know, Black Lives Matter. So it was a very interesting experience to see how that tested with audiences, and we spent a lot of time in the edit trying to balance that stuff. There was also the you know, this little scene that you're seeing. A lot of the organizers that were part of the contingent of Asian Americans who were supporting the Gurley family were also very invested in elevating Black voices. So we had much more limited material with them because they were interested in making sure that the Black activists were at the center, that they were playing supportive roles in the organizing. And so we did a lot in the edit to try to honor that, where you'll see those folks in the background, like playing, you know, providing security or providing like logistical support to the movement that the Akai Gurley family folks were running. But it was, you know, it was interesting. We had a lot of conversations in the edit, and, you know, I don't know, I think it depends on who you are when you watch this, whether you feel like the balance is right. But I think I had the same motivation in some ways with Nine Man, was to making sure that people knew that our our community is not monolithic, that we have like a lot of diversity. And so it's very complicated to tell the stories of our people. And I think this is part of the reason I have like a hard time fundraising in some ways, because I'm not interested in like single personal narratives, which are much easier to pitch to funders. But I feel like our community has suffered so long from not having a diversity of representation that I'm always like doing these sort of more chorus-like character-driven stories. And so that's complicated in the edit, but it's also something I feel committed to, because we just don't have enough. We don't have enough representation out there for me to pick just one lane and go with it.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. Yeah, absolutely. And on top of all of that, right, you launched your film when the pandemic happened.
Yeah.
What was that like? I think you were one of the lucky few who actually had an in-person premiere at a festival, right?
Yeah, we were lucky to be at True False. March 8th, I think, was our premiere. We had 2 more screenings. I feel like, no, maybe it was March 6th. Somewhere between like March 6th and March 10th, we had our premiere, and then I flew home and the whole country shut down. So we were lucky. We were at, our last screening was in a theater with 1,600 seats. I mean, you look at the photos of that and you're now in this context and you're like, oh my God, those people were like days away from quarantining and no one had a mask on. But it was in Missouri, so I guess it hadn't reached Missouri yet. Launching it in the pandemic was really tough because we never had the opportunity to experience the film with, first of all, our collaborators. We worked so hard to make the film, and usually not everybody knows each other. We would have this opportunity to celebrate together, and we didn't have that. The quality of something shown on a screen is also like piss poor, but we also didn't have the opportunity to share it with the subjects. And this is a very delicate film to share with subjects because not everybody was going to be happy with the film. So having to share with subjects via screeners and, long distance conversations was also challenging. I think, it's sad that I, as a director and us as creators, didn't get to have like in-person feedback or a lot of feedback period to what we're trying to put out into the world. But I think that's like a minor thing. I think it was sort of tough in general to not know whether the work that we did on the film would end up resulting in the conversations that we wanted to push. That said, it also, the pandemic also allowed this sort of new way of screening things, which allowed us to reach different types of audiences across the country. And, the summer of reckoning over racial violence and police violence was another opportunity for the film to be sort of elevated in the conversation. So, there were lots of things that happened over the pandemic. There are things that are happening now with this sort of moment of anti-Asian violence that sort of bring some relevance to the film and make me feel like we're still going to have these conversations moving forward. We're going to still have an opportunity for the film to make people think and get into dialogue with one another.
Yeah, absolutely. We have I think we're going to need to go into our Q&A pretty soon, but one last question I had for you what are you working on now? And also, is it going to be focused, are we going to have more scenes in Chinatown? Because both of your films have had the banquet table as a focal point, I feel like, for all these community discussions. So yeah, if you wanted to talk a little bit about what you're doing next.
There's no better thing than putting a camera on a dolly that goes around like the banquet table and getting to eat what's on that table afterwards. So yes, I mean, I hope I'm kind of in love with Chinatown, and you're right that like my filmmaking has allowed me to like become a more involved member of the community and to know my culture better. So I feel like a lot of joy over the fact that these experiences have benefited me in that way personally. I'm working with Tad Nakamura, this great Japanese-American filmmaker. He's making a film about his dad. So it's called Third Act. So I've been working on that. I'm working a lot on like the distribution of this film. We do have formal distribution after the PBS broadcast. And so hopefully we'll have some time in the fall when things open back up to really use the film to develop an impact campaign and do more engagement with with the film. I'm developing a whole bunch of stuff. You know, I've been filming a little bit with my mom. I did film a little something in Chinatown the other day. So there's a lot of things bubbling, but I wish I had a better answer for you. I'm also
No, that's
trying to
great.
clean my house.
I know a lot of our folks in the chat have questions, so I wanted to quickly move in there so we don't run out of time. I'm not exactly sure where I should start. I think the questions are going to pop up on the screen, I believe. There we are. All right, a question from Anna. How much did it cost to make? What was your highest cost? How much did music cost? A lot of it is about costs, and I'm not sure which film she's referring to.
We could talk about, I mean, if you're budgeting for a film, you should budget a lot more than you think. Number one, you're going to work, both my films took me many years to make. So imagine if you were paying yourself a real but minimum salary for like 4 years. Like that's just you. If you want a producer, add that on top. I would say the highest cost is definitely editing. And you really want to spend that money on editing. Editing can, you know, range from, you know, really great documentary editors making like $2,500 to $4,000 a week. And you're going to edit for like 10 to 12 months. And that's sounds like a lot of money, but you should spend the money on your editor. Those folks are like gods in the documentary world. I can't remember what the last part of that question was, but
the music, I think, was the other question.
You know, if you can always get good deals if people want to work on it. And I talked to a lot of composers that gave me varying rates. I think a fair price, if you're budgeting, you should really try to put like $20,000 into your budget for a film score. But you can go a lot higher or a lot lower than that. But if you guys are interested in budgeting, you should go to the International Documentary Association's website, IDA, and they have a really great primer on documentary budgeting, and they give you some straight up numbers. So go in there if you're curious. I won't say that those are the numbers that my people got paid. I don't want to, say that their salary was this.
And how long did it take for you to make 9 Man and Down a Dark Stairwell? Like how many years?
I think 9 Man took me from like soup to, from start to finish, like 7 years. I mean, if you don't know what you're doing, you spend some time doing things every year, and then you don't have enough material, or you're spending time fundraising. I started filming Down a Dark Stairwell in 2016, and we premiered the film at the top of 2020, and I'm still working on it. So, I guess that's, 3.5 to 4 years to 5 years. And I still wake up every day and have to do work on it. So factor that into your budgets.
Yeah, I guess what do you consider the end? It's not necessarily just finishing the film, it's also getting it out to the world, right? Okay, so we're going to move on to another question from Sub 18. What helped the most with getting people to candidly participate in the film?
I think you have to be honest with people. Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be honest about your intentions, and sometimes your intentions are not in, you have to be honest about who you are, like what you're coming to the table with, and what you think the film is going to be. Sometimes you don't know what the film is going to be, especially if I think a good documentary filmmaker does find the story in the edit, and that's why you pay those editors so much money. But I think it really helps just to be as transparent as possible. Like when you don't know something, say that. I also think that it's important to offer a little bit of yourself if you want people to be open and honest with you. It's not always like a take kind of thing. You want to like give somebody a little bit of something if you want them to give you something. And so just be aware of, how you're approaching folks and what you're asking for.
It's really a matter of building that trust, right? And engaging. Okay, we can move on to another question. Oh, I think this is your brother.
Not the police officer.
Yes, this is your brother, Peter. Would you ever consider a follow-up sequel to either of your films? And do you think the stories are best left as they are? Great question.
I'm definitely not doing a sequel to either one of them. A lot of people suggested like the women's component of 9 Man, and I'm like, yes, go make that film. You know, I think there are a lot of talented people that could make that film. And it would be a very different type of story, but I think it would be a great one too. We actually initially had, you know, thought that we could pitch this story about Down a Dark Stairwell as a series. To me, there's so much nuance that made our edit very difficult to like cram everything in and all this detail that we felt like we could have really stretched it out in a series, and that's what everybody's doing these days. But when you don't get an okay from that from folks in the beginning saying yes, make a series, then you don't go that route. So I think we got the story that we wanted in, and I think that I'm pretty sure there will be other films about this case. So I definitely don't feel like it's my responsibility to do it. But there will for sure be other takes on the story. And there are,
I love the idea of a series. I mean,
yeah,
what a great way to.
Who's greenlighting an Asian American series these days that doesn't deal with, you know, crazy rich Asian
right?
Somebody, but
maybe CAAM. I don't know.
CAAM.
Anyone listening?
Gotta be a
We'd love to.
Donor online right now that wants to do that.
Yes. Yes, there's so many stories.
Yeah, series are sometimes like too elongated. You know, I watch a lot of like TV, and sometimes you'll see like a clock, you know, the B-roll is like a clock ticking for a long time. They're just like stretching out the material to fit a series. But, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love what you said about, you know, wanting to portray the diversity, right? That's in the community. And I think, you know, a serialized form is a
I will say
great
that that I have been approached before about doing a narrative version of Nine Man. So like a scripted version. And I do think that's such a compliment because it means that folks like find the space in the community that we captured in the film to be like an exciting, like textured one, which I totally agree with. And so, you know, I think that that would be really fun. I personally don't have the stomach for like the amount of planning it takes to do scripted stuff. But yeah, I think there's some great characters, and there could be some great storylines that you could craft out of that kind of community.
Absolutely. I'm there. I want to see that film. Next question. Let's see. What other documentaries are inspiring you right now? This is from Andrea Lowe.
Oh, well, I enjoyed watching like the Oscar run this year to see who would make it. There were some really great Asian American ones that were contenders this year, like 76 Days and Ramona Diaz's film. So I'm always loving documentaries, and sometimes it's like the hard thing to turn on when you're turning on your TV and wanting to watch something. But documentaries are for sure the best like content that's coming out these days. Like I don't know why people don't watch more. You know, if you're looking at the Oscars list, I feel like Dick Johnson Is Dead should have been nominated, but I really, really love Time. If you guys haven't seen Time, that's like, cried my eyes out watching that. Crip Camp was also amazing. There's so much interesting work going on in the doc space, and it's definitely not just the Oscar contenders that you should be watching, but there are some great ones this year to take a look at.
Yeah, all great films. I think we have time for a couple more questions. Am I right? Let's see. From Caitlin, how do you work with communities, build relationships with a community when you don't speak the language or aren't necessarily from it? Good question.
Well, you can kind of see that I'm like not, you know, while I can kind of claim Chinatown now, I'm definitely not from Chinatown, but I definitely don't speak the language. So for both films, we filmed people speaking in Chinese dialects, and we just pointed the camera. I mean, I think that you have to like make sure that you don't have a fear of not being able to communicate, because there's the verbal communication, but there's also nonverbal communication. And if you have a good DP, or if you're really paying attention to things, you can capture a lot and deal with the language barrier in the edit. One of my favorite people is this cinematographer, director, Nadia Hallgren, who did the Michelle Obama documentary Becoming. And she also did a film called Motherland, which she filmed in the Philippines. And she's Black and Puerto Rican. And she filmed like the entire film is in Tagalog, but she just watched the body language and the faces of the people as they were moving, and followed like incredible scenes where like a baby got lost, and somehow she's got all the shots because she's paying attention to like the way someone's elbow moves before they start moving somewhere. So there's a lot of observation that you can use to get through that. But I also think, one of the reasons our stories as Asian Americans are not often told is because people have this fear of being, people who don't speak the language have this fear of communicating with Asian people because they don't think we speak the language. So they don't send reporters to Chinatown, where almost everybody speaks the language, even at some level. In 9 Man, there's a scene where we were prepared to interview a guy that was on a Toisanese team, very fresh off the boat kind of team. And so I had arranged to bring my PA at the time, who spoke Mandarin, and his girlfriend was there, and she spoke both Cantonese and Toisanese. And I wanted him to speak in Toisanese because that's his most authentic language. And of course, I didn't have a budget for like a proper translator, so the girlfriend was there helping me. And it became so confusing because I would say something in English and ask him a question, and she would ask him, I think she might say something, or maybe she was talking to him in Cantonese, and then he was supposed to respond to me in Toisanese, and he just kind of like gave up, and then he did the whole freaking interview in English. And I was like, oh, I didn't know much English. But I had I was at least attempting. So I think the number one thing is to like make the effort. And there are lots of ways that you can cope with the language barrier, but at minimum, get there and try to get the story.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have time for one last question. All right, from Sheep Warrior 77. Chorus-like character-driven stories. I love that. Can you share more about what draws you to these types of stories?
I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm ADD and I can't focus on like one thing at a time. I think it might also be sort of, maybe it goes back to this feeling different and feeling excluded in ways and wanting to like always include people. So I'm the kind of person where if I like am throwing a party, I end up inviting like 400 people because I feel like I can't leave this person out or that person out. So I think part of me, maybe my fundamental being is like wanting to include everybody. And so that chorus becomes an important part of like including and making sure that everybody has a chance to speak, although, much more limited time on screen.
That's great. So we're sort of coming to the final few minutes of our conversation here. And before, we say goodbye, I wanted to see if you wanted to add anything that I haven't asked. I know this is just scratching the surface, and I mean, there's so much more to learn about you and your films and your work. But is there anything that you wanted to say before we wrap up?
No, I just appreciate everyone showing up today. I'm very honored that people came, and I hope, I hope people are out there creating stories, because it is hard to make a film, and I seem to only be able to make one every 5 years or so. So I hope there are other people making the sequels and getting inspired and doing the work. And yeah, I'm excited to be here. So thank you for having me.
Yeah. And where can folks catch your work or you? Is there any like social media handles you'd like to throw out there?
Yeah, I have like a consolidated website, noncompliantfilms.com, where you can see stuff about 9 Man and also Down a Dark Stairwell. There's also, I think someone's putting out maybe like a sign up link. You can sign up for our listservs if you want to be inboxed. There's a lot of social, we have a lot of social you can follow, but that's a little bit passive. I would love help in promoting the broadcast on PBS on the 12th. It will be on Independent Lens at 10 p.m. in most areas on April 12th. So please tell your friends. It will also stream after that. So I don't know. I hope people are familiar with PBS. I think a lot of young folks don't know that it's basically like the free public broadcasting version of Netflix. You can just download the app, you can watch it on your phone. You could watch it on your Roku. There's a lot of free content on there that's great. And I have friends that have amazing films that are there right now. And also, just so you know, the film has also been translated into Chinese. And I think this is the first time PBS has done that. We pushed really hard for it. And so if it's a film that you think can help you communicate with older folks in your life, or with people who are not as proficient in English, that's going to be a really great opportunity to share something with them. So I hope folks will take advantage of that, and PBS will then sort of see the value in doing that for other films in the future. And also, 9 Man, we just got it translated. We're getting it translated into Spanish. So if you haven't seen the film and can see the film and then want to share it with someone who speaks Spanish, that's going to be an opportunity too soon.
That's awesome. I love that. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, Ursula. Thank you so much for joining us and making space for this conversation. It's so important that we have filmmakers and storytellers like you telling our stories and uplifting all of the authentic stories from our community. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate the support of CAAM. CAAM is the only organization that has supported both of my films. And so if people like the work that I do, they obviously have to appreciate what CAAM is doing to support folks like me. So hopefully everyone becomes a member today. That's my little shill.
Oh, thank you for that plug. Thanks so much, Ursula. So just a few notes for what's coming up with CAAM. Definitely mark your calendars for Campfest coming up in May 13th to the 23rd. Mostly virtual again this year. However, we do have a few drive-in screenings in San Francisco. Also, please join CAAM and ITVS for an exclusive preview screening of Down a Dark Stairwell, along with a discussion to dig deeper into the issues of the film on April 8th, and we'll have more information on that soon. Down a Dark Stairwell will be broadcasting on Independent Lens on PBS on April 12th. Please check your local PBS stations for specific schedules. And as Ursula said, please consider joining CAAM as a member if you're not already, and you can enjoy various perks of membership like this conversation. Finally, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's been a difficult time for our community, and we really appreciate you being here and holding space for these conversations. Thank you and have a great evening. Be safe.